Hey, welcome back to our Journey with Jesus Bible study, where we're going through the Bible chronologically within a year using the Bible recap by Tara Lee Cobble. We start out in chapter 25, and it kind of shows the end of his life, and we start to transition from Abraham to the next generation. We see where he marries one of his concubines and they have other children. However, the promise still lies with Isaac and Ishmael. And then we see the descendants of Ishmael, and it kind of lets you know that God did fulfill his promise to Ishmael, because we see that here. The rest of this is about Jacob and his family, but this emphasizes the fact that he did keep his promise to Ishmael. So now our focus is more on Isaac and Rebekah and their descendants. They only have two children, and that were twins, so Esau and Jacob. And we see that God tells Rebekah, because she's feeling something odd in her stomach, that these kids aren't going to get along. The younger one is going to roll over the older one, and they're just constantly going to be at odds with each other. You know, when you think about it, like God choosing Isaac over Ishmael kind of makes sense if we wanted to try to make sense of it, because Sarah was his wife. That was the promise made to them too. They just tried to take matters into their own hands to have Ishmael. And, it makes sense that promise wouldn't follow Ishmael. But it doesn't really make sense. We can't make sense over the fact that he would choose one child over another that's in the same womb, or I can't make sense of it. But I'm not God. And no matter what I think or how I feel, it doesn't matter. God is sovereign. God is sovereign over everything, and his plan is perfect. And that's where faith and trust comes in, that we have to sometimes look past some of the things that we may feel and just trust him, because his plan is so much better than ours. And he's already been here. He's at the end, so he knows how it's going to play out. We just have to trust him in the middle of it. And so that's one thing. Some of this stuff is hard to read. Some of it doesn't make sense. So I just urge you to lean into him and his sovereignty in those times where it kind of doesn't feel right, and it rubs up against what we think should be, or what we think is good or bad. And we see Esau described as being a rugged, like manly man, and Jacob being described as just being quieter, kind of a homebody, kind of a meek and mild kind of guy. And it makes me wonder, this is, not based on scripture, but it almost makes me wonder if they were raised in such a way, like if Rebekah did favor Jacob because of what God told her, and if Isaac favored Esau because of the promise, and did that alter the way that they parented? Obviously, there's no way for us to know, but it kind of makes you wonder if that had a part to play. Nevertheless, we see that God had a plan for these children, for these babies, right from the womb. And we'll see this play out, that nothing they could do could alter the plan that God had for their lives. And that's so comforting to know that no matter how screwed up I am, because we will see these people, especially Jacob, can be pretty screwed up. However, he takes those things and works it all for his glory. And that's what's amazing to me, to see that as broken as Abraham was, as broken as we're going to see that Jacob is, he still uses them to further his plan. Because, after all, I've said this many times, all he has is broken people to use. So we start seeing what God had told Rebekah kind of play out. We see Jacob being a deceiver. We see him kind of being a little bit of a brat, I would say. Like Esau comes in and he's wanting something to eat and he's famished, and Jacob's kind of like, well, give me your birthright. You can have some, but not until you give me your birthright, and it just reminds me of, way more serious. Like, there's nothing else on the line when, my children are fighting, like, give me that, or you got to do this before I do that, but I mean, it in a sense, I mean, there's way more at stake, you know. But that's kind of what this reminds me of is, and you know, they knew, Jacob and Esau probably knew what God had told Rebekah. So it just makes you wonder, kind of, did they know? And was this maybe Jacob trying to take matters into his own hands? We'll never know, but we just see Jacob living up to his name. So now in chapter 26, we kind of see Isaac stepping into the spotlight here. And we see how Isaac is kind of like his father in the sense that he's facing faith, a crisis of faith, and maybe the Lord trying to grow his faith a little bit. There's famine, and he runs into Abimelech. We don't know if it's the same Abimelech or not, but it's in the same land, Gerar. And I mean, Isaac knows the promises that God has made him, but he still has a little bit of fear. He's still having to, we see him lying about Rebekah just like Abraham did. You know, it's kind of like the sins of the father. And so we just see him kind of repeating the patterns of his father. But God still blesses Isaac. We see that his wealth grows. But the land, the people around him are jealous and intimidated by him. In that land, you know, water's a huge deal for everybody, but I mean, you're in the desert kind of, I mean, water's probably limited. And so, and you know, they're digging these wells. Well, now these people are stopping up their wells, trying to keep them, like, making them move around, you know. And I think we forget the fact that they lived in tents. They were sojourning. They did not have a home. They were moving around. And so every time a well was dug, these people were filling it back up, making life hard for them. But we see Isaac being patient and kind, and we see that God appears to him and reaffirms his promise to him. And it's so kind to see God do that. Like, when we're having a crisis of faith, or when we are doubting a little bit, God shows up and he wants us to trust him. He wants us to love on him. Sometimes we just have to ask. We just have to lean into him. And it's such a kind thing for him to do, to reassure him, hey, look, Isaac, I've made you this promise. I promise you that it is still happening. In my time, it's going to happen. Because Isaac was so kind, him and Abimelech reached an agreement, a pact or a covenant, for them to be able to coexist. But there is a little excerpt at the end of that chapter that talks about Esau and the fact that he married a Hittite woman, which would have been like a Canaanite woman, like who he was not supposed to marry. And we see that it just caused grief. My Bible says it made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And so Esau going against what his parents had commanded him to do, it kind of even shows that he kind of had a rebel spirit about him. And possibly God knew that was it, and that Jacob might have been deceitful, but maybe his heart was more inclined towards God. That's not necessarily in here. That's reading into the scripture, but that's all we have for day 20, and come back for my day 21. Have a good day.